there are days that I think it's inevitable that I will be in random search mode, simply because I get a lot of feedback. And as I have been repeatedly stressing, several beliefs I think are very important. If we're going to talk about beliefs, think about beliefs, do work with beliefs. Some of my constraining beliefs or my formative beliefs are that one is no better than one's feedback loops, and you will ignore all that traffic noise out there that's distracting me into a higher performance state. I guess that was sort of a little riff off Joshua Waitskin, who I embarrassingly mispronounced yesterday as Joshua Waitkin. It's Waitskin. And Waitskin was talking a lot about the use of distractions, bad behavior by other people, things that other people would refer to or regard as intrusions or debilitating kind of forces working against one's concentration as meditative tools, how we use that stuff to meditatively drill down deeper and get deeper into the sort of the root of his process, of his very deep strategic, intellectual, intuitive process. In his case, it seems that the idea of the intellect and the intuition operate in a very fluid way, moving from intellect to intuition, which I'm not sure is the case of in most people's cases, where one of the things we're going to be doing, I think, with the NLP practice, if it's done in a good way, is to allow for this free play between intellectual framing and kind of intuitive stimulus and intuitive input, however that may be defined as the unconscious mind or the conscious mind or something else. I have here my notes from one of my first tube I put up. And let's see, what do we have here? This is a good one, a good note. I'm going to let the camera do its thing. What does it say? I have to read it backwards. Are you aware of your process for forming assumptions? Let's see, what else do we see? How is that related to your sense of identity? Are you aware of your process for forming assumptions? How is that related to your sense of identity? Assumptions. What are we assuming? Assumptions are mini beliefs. If we're doing a belief works, if we're doing belief work, we're basically talking about, you might say, well, that's a belief, a big belief is kind of a large-scale assumptions. But throughout the day, we're making hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands to millions of micro assumptions, small assumptions. And that's where I think this concept in NLP that one cannot impose content, or one should not impose content, or it's possible not to impose content, I think it founders. I think that founders badly. And I think also in another so-called discipline, I consider it more kind of a pay-to-play mind warp training, the Landmark Forum. They talk about the difference between distinctions. They talk about distinctions, but oddly they have no theory of distinctions. They just talk about distinctions as if that's the highest logical level one can go to. And obviously it isn't. Because, you can always use your good chunking up tool, okay? So what kind of declarative statements are you making by chunking up? When we make assumptions, we're making a lot of little mini declarative statements. And so, like, say in the Landmark Forum, they talk about the distinction, whatever that might mean, distinction, between what happened and the story about what happened. But it gets a little bit ridiculous because the only residue of what happened is the story of what happened. And even if you said, well, let's go to the tape, you've got a hard disk recording or a tape of something, and that is certainly one possible interpretation from one angle, from one point of view. And in other ways, it's an impoverished interpretation. And in some ways, it's a very precise interpretation. And maybe in the way the mind records, which is very different, and these people, these New Age frauds, I will be very upfront about that. These frauds who have apparently no knowledge whatsoever of neuroscience and yet hammer on about the way the mind is this perfect recorder of everything that's happened. No, it isn't. We know that it's not the case. So stop saying that. If you're out there telling people that, go study a little bit about memory and find out that that's not how memory works. That's not our current understanding of memory. However, there are also little counter stories about how memory works, and it seems that stimulating certain cells in the brain can trigger very, very specific memories that we thought had disappeared. So there's a certain tension and a certain vexation between the idea of just how exact memory is, how precise it is, what it's capable of, what it's incapable of. Maybe in certain cases or certain minds, memory is different. Memory is phenomenally a very different process. What is this an example of? So you're walking through the day. You're walking around through the day, and you're constantly asking this question without even knowing that you're asking it. But you're constantly imposing content in a way, and that's by the way known as procedural memory. Okay, so all you traineroids and studentoids out there, it's very important to make the distinction between semantic memory and procedural memory. Semantic memory is sort of like going through a dictionary and being able to consciously put names on things, where procedural memory is the kind of stuff you just kind of know what you're doing. You don't have to consciously really think about it. But in a certain way, your procedural memory is imposing content, because if you have a procedural memory that says this is how we navigate this environment, this is how reality works in this environment, and something that changes, you're going to be severely disoriented. So this kind of clownish idea that there is what happened and then there's the story about what happened. Sorry, dude. There's like this collective body of procedural and semantic memory about how this thing operated, how these processes operated, what kind of definitions we put on them. But that's the stuff you have to work with. You can't just snap your fingers and make it go away. You have to constantly impose content on experience. You have to impose content maybe in a process sort of way through procedural memory, but you're still imposing something unless you're in a persistent vegetative state. So I want people to get philosophically very tight on that point, and whether you're doing whatever type of large group awareness training and someone says, well, you can't impose content or that's the story about what happened, you have to realize that that's sort of the fundamental patterning. Those are sort of the engram granular layer of the mind has to work on patterns and pattern recognition. That's what makes it tick. Once you take that away, you basically have a dead brain. So I want you to be very critical about that and not just walk into this idea that you can dispose of content, or you can walk away from procedural memory and just enter into some kind of magnificent unconscious fog where things just manifest. That, as far as we know, unless I'm completely mistaken, that's not how reality works.